We did phase 2 of TradeMapper, we added in extra functionality which allows you to build in map layers in addition to your trade data. So as well as having arrows of trade from one place to another, you can layer in polygons, points or lines to give your map some kind of context. So the kind of context that you're able to give it will depend on what data you're using, the story you're trying to tell, and what data are available, really. But common ones you might want to look at are the species range. So you can determine if trade is involving its native range, any infrastructure which might be impacting the trade. So have new roads been built through, or not even new roads, but are there roads close to national parks or elsewhere where the trade is coming from? Are there ports or airports that might be determining how quickly the wildlife can be taken from source? So all kinds of things like that. You can build in where the closest city is. So it can be really useful, not only to tell your story and make it clear to other people what other factors might be influencing the trade, but it can also help you better understand your data as well. So currently TradeMapper allows you to build in 3 map layers, and it can be a mixture of polygons, lines and points. It uses the format TopoJSON, and if you're not familiar with that, if you normally have worked with Shapefiles or CSVs or GeoJSON, then I'll show you how to very quickly, very simply convert any other map layer to a TopoJSON file. Okay, but first of all, we're just going to have a look at TradeMapper and just add in some regular trade data. So we've got our empty map here. It's going to select and navigate to some data that I saved. And the data I'm using today is trade data on strawberry poison frog, which has come straight from the CITES trade database. I deleted some columns which I knew were irrelevant, but otherwise this is as downloaded. So I'm just going to check when this custom CSV importer box pops up to ask you what kind of information is in which column. I'm just going to check that it's got it right. These 3 columns in the middle are around the location. I'll see that it's got origin 1, exporter 2, importer 3. Now, I've got 2 out of 3 correct, but the importer should be 3 because those numbers in those orange boxes dictate the order that an arrow is drawn in. Then these 2 columns here, they actually contain the quantity information, but TradeMapper's got a little bit confused because the column headings are importer and exporter. So I'm just going to tell it, nope, these should be quantity. And the other columns are correct. So I'll click that. And they can see there's some trade data, which is what you want. Now, if you want to add in your map layer, you click this button here, add map layer. Navigate to wherever you saved your TopoJSON file and click on it. So what I'm going to be adding here is the species native range. And I've got this as a shapefile from the IUCN Red List, which is a great source of species range maps. So it came as a shapefile, but I converted it. And this is a converted file. And I'm going to show you in a minute how to convert, but this one has already been converted. So I found my range, just double click on it, and it's added it. And you can tell that it's been added because it'll appear in your legend up here that a range or a layer has been added. It's called range because that's my file name. And also on the left-hand side, it tells you the map layers. The reason you can't quite see it is because this species has a relatively small range in Central America. So you can see that its range covers Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. And you can see some trade is coming from its native, the countries in its native range, but also a lot of trade is coming from elsewhere. So I might want to explore that a little bit more. I'll click on my filters and say, okay, I just want to check, is all wild trade at least coming from countries within its range? So I'm going to select here on the source, the W, and yes, it is. So all wild trade is coming from Nicaragua in the north and Panama in the south. No wild trade from Costa Rica. That's okay, not everyone has to trade. And if your geography could do with a little memory boost, you can hover over your line and just, okay, double check what those 2 letter codes are. So it's going from Nicaragua to the US. So if we zoom back out and just double check, there's no more wild trade anywhere else, which is what we'd expect. If there was something funny going on, like wild trade from a neighbouring region and a neighbouring country, it could be that maybe there is a wild population in those countries, and maybe the red list has is incorrect, or the scientific literature disagrees, or it might be that there's smuggling occurring. In particular, if there's a trade ban in a range state, you might want to look just to double check that there's not anything funny going on if you've got a trade ban in one country and then it suddenly starts popping up in neighbouring countries. Okay, so that's the wild trade data. Let's have a little look at the captive, and there's a lot more trade in captive species. We can hide that for a second. So we've still got some captive trade coming from those range states, you can see down here. And so that dictates not only if they've got wild trade going on, but also trade in captive species. But then there's also some trade in totally not involving the range states, which is not unexpected because it's being bred in captivity. So they could have imported the parental stock a long time ago and now purely just be trading captive. So you can see an example here involving the UK and Jersey. So that's interesting, and that gives you some context. Now, if you want to add in a couple more layers, we'll show you how to do that. And these layers have not yet been converted to TopoJSON, so I'm going to show you how to do that. So again, I got these from the IUCN Red List, but they're just generic base layer data set. So I've got one that has all of the major cities in the world and one with all the major rivers in the world. So if you look at the Red List, they have this nice base data which is packaged up. I believe it comes from ArcGIS in the first place, but it's made available there and it can give you some good context. So I've already downloaded them as shapefiles to my computer, so you can see them here. And if you're not familiar with working with shapefiles, if you open them, you'll actually see that shapefile is made of lots of different files. So we just need to bear that in mind when we're converting. So I've got all of my shapefiles for my cities here. Now, to convert it to a TopoJSON, I'll go to a website called MapShaper. And if you're struggling to follow all of this, you'll see that I've written all these instructions in the guidance pages that you can find on trademapper.co.uk. So now we're in MapShaper. I'm just going to select all of the files that make up my shapefile and drag them into here. I'm dragging them in. It will allow me to import them. And very quickly, it will show me what that data looks like. That looks good to me. They look like the cities of the world. So I'm going to now export it to a TopoJSON. So you've got all these different formats that you can import and export between using MapShaper. So it's a really nice tool. It's free. Anyone can use it. So then I'm going to export it. And that will now appear in my downloads. And I'm just going to put that in, drag it from my downloads into a different folder that I can easily access. So now I'm going to go back to TradeMapper, add in another map layer, navigate to that cities file, which is the one we just created, double click, and now I have lots of brown spots all over. So these are the major cities in the world, which may be useful for this story, perhaps not, because we're looking in particular at the strawberry poison frog, but it just goes to show that this is how you would do it. I'll just show you again with a line. So similarly, I got this from the IUCN Red List. I have a shapefile of all the rivers in the world. I'm going to go back to MapShaper and just refresh it so it gets rid of the city. I'm going to select, now there's actually two shapefiles in this folder, one about the major rivers in the world and one about, I think this means smaller rivers. So I'm just going to put the major rivers. I'll select all of the files that make up that shapefile, drag it into MapShaper, import them. And as you can see, that looks like rivers to me. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to export it again to a TopoJSON file, export. Once again, that will appear in my downloads folder. You can see here. I want to drag that into just the folder I use for TradeMapper data so I can easily navigate to it. And there we go. And I'm actually going to change the file name because it's a bit of a long, clunky name. I'm just going to change it to rivers. So now back to TradeMapper, I'll add in my final layer and navigate to where I've stored my rivers TopoJSON file. Now you can see if it's a very big file, you get that warning sign that just popped up. Be patient. TradeMapper can handle quite big data sets, but it takes a moment. If you're trying to load a huge data set, like all of the protected areas in the world in excruciatingly fine detail, another way to do that rather than wait and have the potential to crash TradeMapper is in Map Shaper. There's actually a button here to simplify. So if you don't need the very specific outline of a polygon, you don't need to know the exact every little in and out, you just need to know that there is national parks here. If you're looking at something at the global scale, you don't need to know the very specific details of the national park border, for example. Then this simplify button offers you that option. You just click simplify, and again, there are instructions on TradeMapper that you can how to do that. But back to the actual map. So now you'll see that it's added in this box, these little red squiggly lines, which demonstrate where the major rivers of the world are. So although rivers and cities are probably not that much use, if you had more specific information on Panama or Panama or Nicaragua, for example, you might, if you had data at a finer geographic resolution, like the location of the farms, are they very close to national parks? Does that mean something around where they're sourcing their frogs from? Are they very close to any infrastructure, airports or anything? Are they close to just your whatever the kind of story you're trying to tell? Google to see if that data exists, to see if someone has mapped the locations of farms in Nicaragua, if somebody has mapped the tiny little roads up a hill in Panama, because you'll be surprised how much data there are out there that people have turned into a shapefile or a CSV file or other types. And just try loading them into TradeMapper and see how it works. All of the regular functionality, like using the filters, still works. And you can still export them. So if you want to have a file or a PNG or another file type to put in a presentation or a report, these will still work. Okay, thanks very much.